Any other responses to that? But it's ironic, isn't it, in a sense, because we all saying poetry was an oral, right? Oral tradition, meaning that people did actually orally deliver it. And yet today, many of us are just writing it and very afraid to declaim it or read it aloud. Yeah?
Well, it also depends on what culture. I mean, culture has a lot, you know, it's a cultural thing as well. It would depend, and at different times, these things were different. So when I go to, like, I was in India or Afghanistan, my audience, what they ask of me is very different. It was like in India, I would read, and I had never experienced this before, when someone stood up and said, "Could you just read love poems?" Like, basically she told me, "Shut up, just don't read the rest, just read love poems." And you know, that was like a request, and I just stood there thinking, okay, well, I ran out of love poems, but and in Afghanistan they still had this tradition where audience kind of participated. And this is a very old Eastern tradition where you read and the audience kind of participate. Either they participate by responding, like when they like a line, they would just make a sort of, you know, hum or something. And that also happens in African American culture. So, you know, it all depends.
Yeah. I think this is maybe for sort of you all as young writers to think about the difference in the work that you do and the work that makes sense out loud and the work that makes sense on the page. And you know, the way I was taught to write was to read everything out loud, but that doesn't mean I would want to read many of my favorite essays. I mean, there's things that this piece that I read, I think works out loud because it's a piece about people talking and talking fast and loud. Some of my favorite essays I would have loved to have read today. You could do it, but it would be like a lecture, not because they're academic, but because they demand a kind of a slower pace where you're going to sort of linger over the words. And that's something I think is a really valuable experience for development as a writer, is to start paying attention to your own work and think about, all right, if I'm called upon to do a reading, which of my pieces makes sense? And it's not necessarily your favorites. And that really goes to the audience. Which of these pieces do I think I can say to somebody?
That leads me to maybe raising the question that was raised in my class earlier on, and that is that the question raised was, when we write, do we write with an audience in mind, or do we just write? Maybe that's something that we can pick up, yeah? Yeah.
I think there are two ways in which I approach this. I mean, one way, given my background as a journalist, I mean, you were always taught in a daily newspaper to think of the reader, think of the reader, think of the reader. And what I found, though, I always kind of questioned that, or would poke at that, because I felt like the reader became the stand-in for whomever was speaking, whoever they wanted to speak. Like, often when editors came up to you and said, "I think the reader wants this," you could retranslate it to say, I, the editor, I want this. So I felt like it was always such a squishy term, and I wasn't sure what that really ever meant. I mean, I suppose in a larger philosophical sense, what it means is not simply being selfish about what it is that you want to do, or precious about what you want to do, to always be cognizant of the fact that there is someone else with whom you are going to have a relationship, someone else who is going to take over with the text. I think the other way, though, that I think about it now, sometimes for my own sanity, is that I try not to think about whom I'm writing it for, because I just need to write. And if I obsess a little bit too much about that and imagine too much about who that sort of perceived person is or audience is for whom I'm writing, it can often make you limit some of your choices before they've even reached the page. And I often, feel like working from a place of the fewest constraints possible, just to begin, is the most important starting point. But that's like a coping strategy, really, more than anything else for me.
I think for many years I wrote to other writers Chuck Bowden, who was a writer to whom I wrote for a long time. And it wasn't because I was trying to write like him, and sometimes I would write against other writers. This is a very valuable truth about your writing teacher. Sometimes I would write against my writing teacher. You didn't like my story, well, I'll show you. And I will, really, not just this will be good, but I'm asserting something sort of even more clearly, more powerfully than I did. And over the years that sort of changed, and now I realize that I think the audience that I write to is, and this will sound a little odd, I write to the subjects of the story. And not because I want them to like the story. I hate that idea that you can tell your story is good if people who are in it think that that's not true. That's not true. Certainly that Cossack did not like that story. His friend who hooked me up with the Cossack started texting me pictures of bloody faces. Bad review. But nonetheless, sort of the conversation that, because you spend time, this is maybe true of nonfiction, you spend time with a person, listening to them and thinking about them, and then you're sort of speaking back to them this understanding that they've given you. And so they became a sort of a really shifting audience.
I want to try and connect this and expand the discussion a little bit on the value, because we live in a world where time is so precious. Everybody, like 5 minutes, like 5 hours when I was young. So, next door, there's a similar event going on. In fact, yes, I'm sorry, I did go out of the room to go and launch a book next door in 10 minutes and come back here. That book over there, which my center is also responsible for, is a book that deals with the family business in Indonesia. It's a very powerful family business. The Salim Group, of which we have the Mukhtar Riyadi Auditorium over here. We've got about 70 persons over there. They all came willingly. They came, and there are some very senior members of Singaporean society who are there next door. And you probably get a chance to mingle with them over refreshments and all that later. But for them, the value of being the audience today is to see what the authors of this book reveal about this particular family business. And so in other words, there is a kind of a pragmatic, realization of some expectancy on that side. So I just want to pose, do you as audience, when you come, say by choice as Franklin, when you come for participation in a panel like this, like what is it that makes you want to come? Like, is there something that poetry offers? Is it a value that cannot be measured, as they always used to say? So we live in a world in which a lot of people only attend things which bring immediate material, tangible rewards. So is literature sort of losing that, and other kinds of people, other kinds of books and writers are sort of like taking advantage of it. I don't know, anybody want to say something? Yes? Maybe you first, yeah. First and then two, yeah. What do you stand up that you can project? Yeah.
When you talk about valuation, especially in your second question where it's about whether you should take an audience, when you're taking an audience, you're putting a completely different set of values on it. Like you said, people at different time, and then when they want to pay for something, they want something tangible. Right. So you cannot just value it that way. It all comes down to what the form was meant for. If you take someone and people will pay because they believe in the cause or because the poet is just really that damn good. But if you're writing for an audience, not for monetary gain or just get a message out there, like that's what you're talking about, you don't like to be rated on how good your poetry is just because the audience doesn't like it. But what I was always told and what I believe in is that good poetry always evokes emotion in the target audience. But the best poetry puts forth an argument or an idea that forces the audience, no matter who it is, into the shoes of the target area of the message that you want to bring, and then it gives them their own logic. It forces them to think your way, and then it's an argument that just cannot be beat. It's like the old school, like when you said poetry was an oral tradition, dates back to the Greek century where it was all about debate, where all the philosophers, all the smartest men in town would just go and commune like once a week one guy will bring upon his idea or his poem or whatever he wants, and then everyone just comments on it or they just stand there or. So, talking about quiz, I talk about Socrates. His most famous debating style, Socratic debate, it forces the opponent to think in his own method. He only asks questions, so the guy is forced to beat himself with his own answers. So I just think that that's what a good poet should do. It should force the guy to think in your terms, but because he's thinking about your terms, you just can't lose. The best poetry doesn't matter what price or anything, but if it is just read that and good and set any price on it, because you just can't be beat.
It was also part of the Greek culture to have these engagements and all of that, right? Yeah.
It's not really a comment based on your question, but is it fine if I ask another question?
Sure.
Right. My name is Daniel, and I have two questions. One is more about technicalities and the other. So I suppose my first question based on the theme today of audience, because right now I'm doing a creative nonfiction course, and I know you hate the term creative nonfiction, but we learned about, with read readings about the specific special quality or nature of creative nonfiction is that you enter a communion with your reader, and then you sort of strip down your defense systems and you enter vulnerability, you show your weak points, and that is kind of like a special quality which you share with the reader. So maybe we can redefine problem, maybe it's not so much of a problem, but of audience, how do you use audience meaningfully? How much do you buy into this idea that it's a shared relationship with the reader? And I suppose the more technical question would be, in terms of writing directly to a reader, have you ever done a second person narrative, addressing the reader as a you, and how does that fit for you guys?
I'll start right away with the you and the second person. So in the United States, at most newspapers, the tradition is third person, no first person, to the point sometimes you'll read newspapers and it gets a little bizarre, where you'll have a reporter refer to him or herself as the reporter. So they'll be writing and all they needed to say was, the guard talked to me, but instead they'll say, the guard talked to the reporter. And it's just so odd because you're like, that's you, just say it's you. And so it's very difficult in that environment if you sort of are a little provocative and that bothers you and you want to get past that. And I was always really frustrated by it. I felt that it was very strange to completely wash the consciousness of the narrator out of the story, to not show the sort of the vulnerability, the sort of, the person that was essentially telling the story. It was important to kind of reveal who that was. But I wasn't allowed to use I. So what do? So, second person. No one told me that I couldn't do that. And so it was kind of awesome. It was really great, but I kept getting sort of called into editors' offices and they didn't really know what to say because I wasn't using I, but it was obviously too much of me, even if I was backdooring it. And so that was an interesting exercise for me, just in terms of figuring out the way in which that could, to some extent, allow for my revealing of myself. But the other part about that I think is interesting is that you are actively also positioning the reader in that place as well too. So it's a double, it's occupying sort of a doubled space. That you is both you as the narrator and that you is both the reader as well too. And so that's where it can get especially tricky because some people will say, I don't want to be invited into that space. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. I'm not the you. An example that I could give you that you might want to look up is there's a book by Louis Rea called The Devil's Highway, where he recreates a failed border crossing in the United States. And there are two portions of the book. The first portion of the book, there's a whole section in which he writes about the work that the border guards do. And he does it from the perspective of you. And then, toward the end, when he recounts the moment when those who were in the border crossing began to get dehydration and died, that's another point at which he uses the you. And it's a very incredible, it's powerful to look at those two things side by side and why he made that choice as a writer. That might be instructive for you to take a look at and to see what happens, what's the effect in both those situations, to have these two people who are essentially, one might say, sort of cast against each other, both of their stories being told from that perspective, and you as the reader being invited into that space as well. So I'll answer the you question and then I'll turn it to Jeff.
Or Nathalie? No, actually.
No?
You answer both.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
I like that book too, Devil's Highway, yeah. Although I don't like this person. But
That's good. See, this is why it's important to have a
Yeah.
debate. I think I like it, if used sparingly and thoughtfully.
So, and actually I don't like it, but I've come to doubt my dislike of it because I realized it was kind of piety that I had. Because it's a manipulation, obviously. It's like the present tense, which I'm also not crazy about. Typically I write a story for a magazine and they insist on present tense, and then when I put it into a book, I just go through in past tense everything. I don't like that claim of immediacy. You are there. You are there is my least favorite kind of literary journalism, that kind of breathless form that comes out of war reporting and sports reporting. You're not there, and there's a distance, and that distance is interesting. That distance becomes part of the story, and that becomes a way for the reader to enter that distance. That said, books like The Devil's Highway, which I think is great, and I've been lately seeing just more and more second person. Maybe I'm looking for it and saying, oh, that is really good. That is really good. I just think it's something, and I think we should do it here. It's something to be wary of, and make sure you're not using it just because you haven't created that intimacy. So you think
Forcing it versus